This is Beyond Busy. I'm Graham Alcott. I'm the author of a number of books, including the global bestseller How to Be a Productivity Ninja, and I'm the founder of Think Productive. We help people to make space for what matters and get more done, and we partner with some of the world's leading companies who share our mission to transform the world of work. Beyond Busy is where I explore the often messy truths and contradictory relationships around topics like work-life balance, happiness and success, and explore with interesting people what makes them tick. In short, this is where we ask the bigger questions about work. My guest today is Nic Marks. Nic is one of the world's leading experts on happiness and the founder of Friday Pulse, a tool to help organizations find out how happy their people are at work. He also created the Happy Planet Index to show which countries have the happiest people, and he spent years thinking about how to be happy and the relationship between happiness and success. So in this episode, we talk about how to be happy. He talks about his mentor, a Chilean economist who changed his life, his 5 ways to well-being, and much more. This is Nic Marks. I'm here with Nic Marks. How are you?
I'm very good, thank you. Very good. Nice to meet you, Graham.
We're here to ask the bigger questions about work. Let's start with your day job and what you're currently doing. So Friday Pulse, helping organizations to really focus on happiness and figure out what that means in the workplace. Did you want to just start with Friday Pulse and just explain what you guys do?
And so I'm a statistician by trade. So I'm looking to create a measure that is useful for organizations. And basically our measure is happy weeks, which is, have people had a good week. And that builds up into a metric for an organization that allows them to track how every team is, how the whole organization is. And it's very, very responsive. I mean, most organizations don't have a responsive people metric. Most of their people metrics are quite lagging. So there'd be, obviously they look at things like retention and things like that, but they might look at engagement, but they tend to do that in once a year survey, maybe once a quarter now, some organizations. So I want to create something that's very at the moment. And, when you start collecting that data, you can see the impact of COVID running through because you see the sort of dip and a rise. And what creates very interesting with the data is that effectively the shape of the curve is the resilience. We all have setbacks. Every organization has a setback. We've obviously had a global setback. How quickly do we recover? So that I find the data really interesting, and it allows for the fact that happiness, which is sort of like a good bad signal, it ebbs and flows. We have good weeks, we have bad weeks. And in fact, I sometimes think about the fact there's just different wavelengths to happiness. You can have 3 moods in a morning in an hour, and then you've sort of got to feel to the day, and then you've got to feel to the week and even the year and the decade. We're old enough that we've probably had good and bad decades in our life. And it's of course, not every day in a bad decade is bad, but there's this, you put a year down and like this and and so I by measuring it weekly, you start to get into the way that it's very fluid. And that's what I really like about it. And we create useful data for team leaders and organizations to understand the happiness in their organization.
When I think about sort of leadership and management, like the idea of kind of walking around the office, you can sometimes just get that sort of underlying gut feel around whether people feel up or whether it feels a bit more down or a bit low. And I guess what you're doing is really taking a lot of that and actually just making it more accurate and more measured and more sort of systemic as part of the toolkit for a manager or leader.
I think that our feelings are data. Sometimes we learn something about the world when we start feeling it. I mean, there's occasions when we don't realize we're angry till we start saying something, and it's like we've actually felt it before we've in a way become conscious of it. And so what we're really trying to do is saying, look, everyone in your organization is a sensor. They're sensing things all the time. Let's capture some of that. And we capture it in a very simple metric, which is how happy people's weeks are. But, I think it's very, very useful. And you don't really need to go much more complex than that. I mean, yes, we go into deeper dives where we look at what are the drivers of happiness at work. And we do those, perhaps we do them every quarter in Friday Pulse. So we do a weekly cadence and a quarterly cadence, a more deeper dive. But that probably gives you as much information as you really need to know what's going on in your organization. So we try and keep it very simple, very easy. But and it's it used to be managing by walking around. I mean, that's what my dad did. My dad used to be a CEO, and he'd walk around the factory floors, and he'd walk around this, and he'd smile at everybody, but he would always try and sense it that way. This does absolutely give you that frontline feedback, digital format every week.
And so if I'm an employee in an organization and I get the link to fill in that survey, one thing I found interesting when I was reading up about it is it takes less than 2 minutes to do this for the whole week. So what questions am I being asked in that 2 minutes? What's my experience as a user of it?
We ask people, how you felt at work this week, from very unhappy to very happy. So that's the good, bad signal. And then we just ask people to share effectively what you would do in a sort of retrospective if you were a tech team or something like that, which is you ask people what's gone well and what hasn't. But we're talking about the culture rather than their work. We try and very much make it about people's experience. So I've experimented with lots of other questions, like asking, have you had a good week or not? And people give you an answer, but it tends to be more about what they're doing rather than how they feel. So I wanted to get it into how they feel. So we use that. But then we ask them, like, what's a success for you this week? Have you got anyone you want to thank? I think that we don't express our gratitude enough. So we just try and put it in front of people. You maybe want to thank a colleague for something they've done. And it's just notes. It's not sending flowers. It's not sending vouchers. It's just doing that. And particularly with so many teams more virtual these days, but even in teams that are together, people get a little thank you note, and you get this, what we call positivity resonance, where, they feel good for being thanked. I feel good for thanking, actually. And then we bring it into a team meeting on a Monday so that everyone knows that I've thanked Emma or whatever it is. And so it's a sort of shouting out. And then we also allow a space for people to share a frustration, a concern, or have an idea. Those are all written and they're named. When you answer our digital questions, our numeric questions, they're anonymous. When you put a note, it's named. And we fold those up wrap those up into a team meeting for the team leads. We package data for them into a PowerPoint for them so they can talk about it on a Monday. And we stack the data up to the more senior teams. There's this one other thing we do on a Friday. It's just at the end, we ask a silly question. We're a product about happiness at work. So, we'll ask, are you an early bird or a night owl? Do you like the beach or the mountain or whatever it is? And it's just a sort of polling bit of fun.
Obviously, you then have access to this data on a real macro level. So do you find that, when there's a huge, like, England team winning in the football or something, do you get like everybody's happier that week? Or when the sun comes out, like, are there some interesting little findings like that you figure out?
We saw COVID hit last March, and that was a massive drop, and that came across all of our clients. Our clients are mainly the UK, North America, some European, couple of Southern Hemisphere, but mainly North. We saw that hit. In our data, probably there are some weather effects. If I look at the weekly average, it bumps along, and I've never actually really tried to tie that to weather forecasts. But when you look at the UK data, so YouGov collect data every week on the mood of the nation, and you definitely see weather effects there. So you see the effects of lockdowns this time. Christmas went up, and then January, February was rubbish, wasn't it? And then right through March, April with the bad weather, and then when the weather started to pick up, even though lockdown, your mood started to go up a bit. So weather definitely in the UK at least has a big impact. Yeah,
less so in California where it's just hot and sunny every day or something. Right?
Well, two of my team are in India at the moment. They're ethnically Indian, and they went back for summer lockdown, and it's just like, oh, another sunny day, is it? Yeah.
One of Think Productive's sort of ways of working, my company, is that when we have our daily huddle, we're asking people, what are you stuck on? And it just creates this environment around, it being an acceptable thing that you will be stuck sometimes, and that's part of the thing. Do you find that there are other things that organizations are maybe asking you for, or that you're sensing where people are they're not asking those questions, or it's sort of causing sort of issues within the culture by just us not fronting up to stuff, or not kind of asking the right kind of questions as a team?
Questioning is such a healthy process, and I don't think most people do it enough. It's very much in my DNA. I trained as a therapist when I was young, so that idea of reflecting is very much instilled in what I do. And I think that whenever we do a rollout in an organization, there's always skeptics. There's always some of the senior leader team that are skeptical. They think, some of it is it's fear. fear of opening a Pandora's box. You know, if you ask people how they feel, oh my God, these nasty things are going to come out. And actually, it's the nasty things that are there, the better out than in. So, you know, they fester otherwise, don't they? They rot and they undermine things. So, and then, you know, actually when they start actually understanding that also in there is all this good stuff that they're not actually, you know, getting out. And so we're really very much sort of designed in the idea to be, I mean, you could say biased towards the positive, but certainly based on the same similar ideas to appreciative inquiry and things like that, where you're looking to accentuate the positive. But it's because in life and in business, you know, we tend to think about the negative stuff more. We tend to think about the next challenge. We don't tend to just stop and pause and think, it's a good job. We did that well, you know, and sometimes there's lessons to be learned from what's gone well. You know, you can learn from what's gone well as what's gone wrong. I mean, people get obsessed with, you've got to find out why you failed. But but also find out why you did well. That's good too. Yeah,
that's so true.
But also just the human thing of like, you know, pat on the back, good job. We're much more motivated by that than money. I mean, it's not to say you have to take money off the table. You know, I sometimes ask a question around fair pay. But it's not so much, you know, the extra bit of money that you get. It's much more, do you get on with your team and do you feel appreciated?
Yeah, and just feeling valued is such a huge thing in life, isn't it? You know, just feeling like what you're doing matters and has an importance.
As someone who says, when people feel valued, they add value. And it's this reciprocity in the whole situation. You know, and in a way, if you're thinking about happiness at work, you're turning the sort of psychological contract really of the relationship between the employee and employee on the head. You know, normally it's like, how much can I get out of you paying you the same money? And this is like, how can I create you a great job so you flourish? And you actually get more back that way. But it does take you to go that sort of orthogonal route and have the courage to go that actually we trust that if we give people the space, they will flourish.
I don't know if this is a great segue or a rubbish segue. You can comment, but that whole thing about feeling valued and then adding value. So you went to work for an American management consultant.
My first job, yeah.
You write about it saying, I went for that job because I thought it was difficult to get, so it would be a really important thing, and then you didn't enjoy your time there. So I'd love to hear why. What didn't you like about it? And then what did you learn from that for the rest of your career?
I mean, I was that arrogant at university that it was, you know, we had milk rounds then. I mean, God, it's changed, hasn't it? You know, and people would come round and I'd been to Cambridge and I went to Lancaster to do a master's, and they came round to Lancaster and I did a very specialist thing called operational research, which is basically systems thinking and decision making. And Anderson Consulting came up to now Accenture. And everyone said that's the hardest job. So arrogant me, it was the only job I applied for. I mean, it was, the reason was I didn't really know what I wanted to do, you know. And I so they said that was the hard. And my tutors were going, well, what about British Steel or NHS? You know, no, I don't know. I'll apply for that one. Yeah. Anyway, and then they were almost cross with me that I got the job because I was the only one in the year that got the job. I think one other guy actually got offered it, but he didn't go. He was super bright, super bright. Anyway, and then I came in down to London, and the thing with Anderson was that it was a great experience in lots of ways because you had this cohort that joined together, so you had a great bonding. You went into your first jobs, and I got a plum first job, which was I was doing marketing software, very, very new stage. I could get a little CD-ROM and get people's postcodes and find their address. And they were blown away with this. And it was great. And I had a great time. But what I knew was what was happening to all my peers, and they were being sent up to north of England on big NHS projects or this or that. I just got engaged. I didn't want to go to the north of England. I just got a house in London with my girlfriend, soon-to-be wife, and I didn't want to go. And so, and I just could see that people were taking a certain way. I mean, they'd had like almost like school sort of, my kids used to get good order marks and bad order marks, but used to sort of get those. And, you know, I'd get these good orders ones for things. Then I got a bad one for having too long hair. And I thought, you know, really, you know, my hair wasn't this long, but it was, you know, I was really like, is that the most important thing about me? You know, and I've always been a slightly one of my publicists once described my look as a bit undone, Nick. You're a little undone. She was very good. I was like, okay, yeah, that's probably, I kept that. She says, you're not quite unkempt, but you're just undone. Anyway, and I just didn't. So I also was starting to figure out that I was interested in sustainability issues and things like that, and I thought maybe I should apply my intelligence to that. So that's kind of the way I went. Yeah.
That whole thing with being sent off to places. I remember actually working with a couple of people from Accenture for a little while, and it was this whole thing of you'd just be in Basingstoke for a month, and then you'd be in Manchester, and then you'd be, and I remember just thinking, the lifestyle of it was so all encompassing. You just have to kind of throw yourself into it. And actually, the two people that I'm talking about were really good at just going out to a pub or a nightclub or a sort of city square and just talking to strangers, which I just thought was just, just totally out there. But it was like, that was how they would get their social life, because they weren't sort of surrounded by, friends and family and networks and stuff.
Yeah. It was a lot to do with the fact I was engaged. I wanted to live with Marie, and it's like, I didn't want to have that. So, yeah.
That might bring us nicely on. You started to think about environmental issues and thinking about happiness in that kind of way. And you write about this person that you came across, Manfred Max Neef.
Correct. Yeah.
And just the way you write about him is just really intrigued me. So it sounds like you went along to see a talk of his, and then were just totally blown away by his way of thinking and his ideas.
Yeah, I handed in my notice at Accenture, and I didn't have another job to go to. And my dad was very concerned about me. And he took me to a talk by Manfred. And my dad was a business leader, and he was quite into things like spirituality in business and alternative ways of thinking, and so he would go to these talks. So he took me to see Manfred, and he'd obviously met Manfred before, because I remember him introducing himself and Manfred introducing him. And Manfred started to talk about language and about how we didn't have the right language to discuss the issues that we face. So the dominant language of today is the economic language he was talking about, but our major issues were about sustainability and he came from Latin America, so there's a lot of persistent poverty ideas he wanted to talk about, and he said you don't have the language for it, and he started to put forward the idea that we should talk about the language of human need rather than of sort of dollars and pounds, and I just was like, wow, and I do say it's the talk that changed my life, but of course I was ready, I was ripe in lots of ways. One talk would be quite unhinged for one talk to change your life. But I was searching, the reason I left, Accenture, Anderson's, was that I wanted to do something with more social value. I hadn't really identified what yet. And anyway, the opportunity came to work with Manfred, and I did that for 3 or 4 years. I mean, mainly at a distance. I went out to Chile quite a few times. He was Chilean. I learned a lot from him. Yeah.
One of the things that you wrote was that he was the person who made you realise that none of us asked big enough questions.
Yeah, he wrote this great paper on. I wrote some great papers, but what was it about issues of? I think it was called A Stupid Way of Life. But he was very fascinated with stupidity. He thought it was the fastest moving human trait, not intelligence, stupidity. Anyway, I don't know if he was right, but he had interesting ideas. He wrote another one on the pruning of language, about cutting away words so that you can get to the truth.
Right.
It might have been in that paper, but he talked about issues of primary and secondary importance. So an example he would give is that, people get very worried about whether their party gets in power. And they think that if people like them were in power, the world would be better. But we sort of tried every range from left to right to middle to this, and we still seem to have problems. So he said, maybe the problem is the structure of power, not who is in power. And so it's that sort of thing. And in that way, I think he got me engaged in very big questions. And I think in my own way, I found my way to happiness, through quality of life statistics, through health statistics, through sustainability statistics, through, well-being, into happiness. Because in a way, happiness, in its nebulous word it uses, but it's, it sort of gets closer to what people want from life, and therefore can you help them with that?
Are there some? I mean, I love that thing about stupidity, and it strikes me that could just in itself be a sort of like a lens that you could apply to so many topics, like look for the stupid stuff, and then suddenly it starts to open things up. Do you think there are other things like that would help people to ask bigger questions? So someone listening to this, if I was to say, how can we help them to ask bigger questions, or how can you help me to ask bigger questions? Like what are some tips and tricks that you use to help with that?
God, I've not really thought about it like that. So
that's a big question, isn't
it? Well, it's I mean, you know how it is. Have you got kids?
Yeah, I have one. Yeah.
And how old?
He's 7. He's coming up 8.
So why is probably a word that comes out quite a lot. Is it why?
Yes.
And it's like my middle child was particularly curious, right? And used to always ask me, 5 whys and you're at the Big Bang, aren't you? It's like, sort of you eventually you sort of get to a place where you kind of like, it's sort of you go. Yeah. I mean, I think it's about asking big questions is about being open to not knowing, which is quite scary. I think in lots of people, they want to know. It's like, because in the end, none of us really knows, do we? We're all fools finding our way through the world, finding our path, and just trying to, avoid doing too much damage. And, I mean, it's, I think that people often go, massively about meaning and purpose and things. And I think it's really important. But it's like, you can't really answer those questions, and we're all quite different, and we're similar and we're different. So I think it's asking bigger questions is trying to just go underneath it, ask what's, and like if you say to someone, "You're right," they just go, "Yeah," and then you go, and particularly during COVID, I was doing this, no, really, are you, and you can immediately open something, but the second it takes 2 or 3 to open up that space, and so. Don't take people's first answers, I think would be one way to get to bigger, deeper stuff. And then, when you want to go to, so there's sort of bigger, which is deeper, and there's bigger, which is higher. So there's sort of that, and it's sort of seeing behind that veil. Another thinker I like, I don't know if you know him, is Stafford Beer. Do you know Stafford Beer?
No.
Stafford Beer was a systems thinker. He was one of the founding fathers of what's called cybernetics. He was very active in the 60s and 70s. He used to be in British Steel, actually, helping them with how they designed all the systems that made the steel. He's a great thinker, great thinker. Anyway, he wrote a book called Think Before You Think. And the parameters for which you sort of want to approach a problem, think about that before you think about it. So don't just rush in. And as a statistician, as an old statistician now, I worry sometimes about the big data world, because I don't think people think enough before they start analyzing the data. They've got so much data, they've got so many toys to play with, they can see patterns. I don't really think enough about why they're doing it or what they're trying to achieve. I mean, I'm not a brilliant statistician, technically. I always work with better statisticians than me, technically. But what I can see, I think, somehow is how things connect together and what I'm looking for. So, some of the things that I've designed over the years, you end up creating something quite simple. I mean, just like about happiness at work or things, create something quite simple, because that will create the traction, but it takes you quite a while to get to that simplicity.
Yeah, maybe that leads us on to a skill that you very much have is as just a storyteller, and using data in ways that really, explain the trends and get things across. And you did this very famous TED Talk in 2010, talking about the Happy Planet Index. Do you want to just talk about that work? And because that was probably the first thing I saw of yours, and I'd love to just hear that story of how all that came about.
First big thing that just came out of the woodwork, really. So it's 2006 the first Happy Planet Index was released, and I was working at New Economics Foundation, which is a think tank in London. I founded their Centre for Wellbeing there, and coming with the idea that well-being was a topic coming to government, but no one knew how to measure it. So I was like, let's drive some measurement underneath it. Anyway, we were doing a project, I think, with WWF, can't remember, someone like that. And
not the wrestling one,
no, World Wildlife Fund. Yeah. God, they are both the same, aren't they?
No, they had to change. The story of that is the the wildlife
No.
charity sued the wrestling people and won. And so, yeah, they have to change it now to WWE, I think it is.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, it was definitely the environmental one.
Yeah. So you were with the environmental one.
Although I do own a Mexican wrestling mask. You know, I do. Me and my son, he used to play rugby, so he used to go on rugby tour, and we had a black and gold rugby themed evening. And I was in Mexico 3 weeks before, and I saw these amazing black and gold wrestling things. So we went as cool wrestlers. Very funny. Anyway, that's a
probably scared everyone in the corner shop if you were,
I wouldn't scare anybody. They'd think they could take me down. I don't think I've been in a fight since I was about 9 or 10. Anyway, we were doing a project for them on sort of how environment and well-being came together, and we'd written a report. It was okay, and the head of comms at NEF said to me, she said, Nick, you should have something a bit more statistical in here. You're a statistician, could you not do something? And of course, what I really wanted to do was a big survey where you'd look at people's environmental behaviour and their well-being, and you bring it together. But we didn't have the budget for that. And I was very active in the well-being world there. There was an indicator called Happy Life Years, which is happiness and life expectancy brought together. So it's quality adjusted life expectancy. And I've seen Ruud Veenham, who's the guy that developed it, and he said, "Oh well, life's never been so good worldwide. Happy life has never been higher." And I turned to my friend next to me, who was a Norwegian psychologist called Yor Vitisero, and I said, "Yeah, Yor, but we're slightly messing up the planet as we do it." And I think that was a seed of an idea. And then when I did this, I thought, well, if I took Happy Life Years and I divided it by ecological footprint, I would have sort of a bang for buck, a well-being for resource use. How much planet are you using? And I actually had this idea on a walk with my dog, and I was at the top of a hill, and I pretty much ran down the hill and got my laptop out. And 2 hours later, I had my first wave. I ripped, data from here and there, and did it, and I thought, well, this is something quite interesting. So I took it to a NEF meeting. We used to pitch things, and the policy director goes, "Oh, Nick, this is quite profound. Maybe we won't do that for the WWF. I think we might do something else with that." And it became the Happy Planet Index. And when we released the Happy Planet Index, at New Economics Foundation, we had a report that was downloaded 40,000 times. We thought it was pretty good. Happy Planet was 1 million in the first week. It went in 180 articles around the world. It just went like that. And we're actually going to we've done a few updates, and we're going to do a new one in October, November this year. And sure.
And tell us more about how that's used, because I think you're involved in, is it Bhutan that does the
through that whole
national happiness instead of gross domestic product or something?
Yeah, I think I first went to Bhutan about 2003-04, and I will say I advised them on how to do gross national happiness. Apparently, foreigners don't advise; they do projects. They didn't really operationalize my ideas. I went out about 4 or 5 times. I did quite a bit of work with them. It's a tiny country, Bhutan. It's 600,000 people. They don't have a statistics agency. They don't, they rely on some UN things, and even the population of Bhutan was unknown when I was there. They then did a census, and they discovered there only were 650,000. In the UN, it said 1.1 million at that time. They actually got more. It actually was in their self-interest to inflate the population because they got more funding. So I think they were very happy for it to go up, but they then discovered it was only something like 680. Anyway, so I did advise on gross national happiness. It's an extraordinary country, Bhutan, not without its problems. It's got ethnic cleansing in the south. It's got some issues, but I don't actually like the statistics he came up with. They didn't hit my simple, easy to use criteria, but it's a very worthy effort.
Okay, so I'm going to interrupt the podcast, which I don't do very often, and that must mean I've got something very important to share with you. So what I want to share is I've got these really big events coming up, and I would love you to join me. like, where are we at with trying to get some of those statistics more mainstreamed in places like the UK or the US? Because it does feel like we're as far away as we've ever been, really, from thinking about the well-being and happiness of people, and we are still very focused on the economic indicators, and very blunt economic indicators at that. So what needs to change? Like, how, like, if you could wave a magic wand, or if you were sort of advising, I guess, the next prime minister or the next opposition leader, what would that look like?
Well, Britain does better than most for measuring it. So when the Cameron, particularly the coalition government, were in, they really took wellbeing very seriously, and they did actually give the ONS a budget to measure wellbeing of the UK, and we do have wellbeing indicators. You'll sometimes see something about, what's the happiest place in Britain, or what's the and it comes out every year, and it goes right down to ward level, So
I read a really cynical take about that one, though, that they brought that in, and then through austerity, there was a year where it really went down. So they just kind of swept it under the carpet a bit. Is that true, or did I read that wrong?
I don't know whether they did that. I mean, I left the policy world about 2012, and part of the reason was that, I founded the Centre for Wellbeing accidentally in 2001. Most of my things seem to happen a bit accidentally, and I. One of our aims was to get the government to measure well-being, and that was achieved. And so I knew that if I was to stay, it'd be more in critiquing and lots of committees and things like that to do that. And it's not really my personal style. So I left. I left. The Centre for Wellbeing existed for a few years after I left, but doesn't actually still exist now, which is a shame, because I think NEF could be a good critiquing voice about what's going on now. But they let that work go for their own reasons. But what would I be advising? Well, I think that, when we look at things like levelling up, we look at things like that, there is levelling up to do. It's not particularly geographically based. It's more about opportunities. So, when we see this debate around racism going on at the moment, and about the fact, is it systemic racism? Is it just some individuals? Is it both? I mean, it's always both, isn't it? But there are other factors other than race that predict that create things, and race is an independent factor to it. So it's like the first report that came out that said, oh, really, it's really about economic independence. Well, it's true that there's that, but there's still an extra burden about facing the uphill struggle of not being white in a country that's dominated by white people. Although we're not white, are we? We're pink. I don't know what it is. But then it's and then there are the people that say, it's everything's systemic. Well, we have had improvements too. So I think people don't understand the data well enough, and don't report it enough. But there is data there on well-being. There is quite a lot we can understand about it. The well-being data is not quite so good at picking up things through time. It's okay, it does pick up things through time, but not. It's much better at cross-sectional comparing, because we adjust to things that slightly happen. So like famously, we don't have well-being subjective well-being increases with rises in GDP, even though and what's going on there. Well, part of it is just a measurement artifact, which is that when we ask a question on a 0 to 10 scale, you can't go to 11, whereas you can always get the 11th thing in GDP, so you can keep growing. So there's things like that, which are purely measurement issues. And then and what comes out of these, we see this international thing. So we see that as the World Happiness Report, it says Finland was the happiest country at the moment. People go, oh, the Finns, they can't be that happy. It's always dark there, and they've got suicide rates or whatever like that. What people don't understand is the reason that Finland and Sweden and Norway and Switzerland are the happiest countries is because their social safety nets stop the poor from being miserable. It's not so much that the middle classes and the rich are happier, it's that the poorer people are much less unhappy. And that brings up your national mean. And then people go, oh, well, that makes sense. But I mean, I don't understand why people don't say that more, because it's about looking after the bottom 20-40%, whether that's in income or whether educational standards, all those sort of things. And it's about creating mobility through society, so it becomes a more meritocracy. And then you get to decent levels of human happiness.
And I've read a couple of things as well, that as well as it, obviously just statistically what's happening there is, it's pulling up the data if the bottom 20% are happier, but also that the level of inequality between, you know, say the richest 10% and the poorest 10%, it tends to be happier when that's closer too, right? Which I think is also to do with just people's sense of fairness and sense of control around this stuff, and all of that's going to play in too, right?
Absolutely. And you know, we all compare ourselves, and we're all actually, you know, tend to make upward comparisons rather than downward. So we tend to be, whatever income level we are, we tend to look up at people. You know, what does my brother-in-law earn? Is what I used to always say. You know,
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
and it's like, you know, and in London. So if you live in London and you've got money, it's a nice place to live. If you haven't, it's not only is it not easy to live in London without money, it's also you see money about you all the way, so it's right in your face. And it's the reason why urban poverty is worse than rural poverty. In lots of ways, often people who are poor in rural poverty have access to other resources, green space, other things. They might have more sense of community, which is an important factor. There might be higher levels of trust, there might be lower levels of crime. There's lots and lots of things in that. It's still not good to be poor in the rural, but I'm just saying it's less bad than being urban poor. And so, you know, we see that in stuff in the data. So I think the data is very strong in that way.
Switching gears very slightly, but staying on the same tack. So if we take this back into happy workplaces and morale at work, so you've done some really interesting work and writing around company morale and ideas for promoting good morale. So if someone's listening to this as a leader, what can they do to keep the morale high and to notice where morale might be at? I'm
obviously going to say measure it. So use something like Friday Pulse. There must be other things available too, but you know, is you're checking how people are feeling regularly, and it's about taking that seriously, because in the end, if you ask people and you don't act on it, then you just lose. In fact, it's worse than probably not asking them. So it's about, actually, are you going to take this data and do some different things about it? Now, people can get themselves in a bind about this. Oh my God, I'm going to make them happy, have I? No, it's not about making them happy. It's about creating the right environments. And of course, our experience of work is very, very proximal. It's very much who we work closely with, what we're working on. And so you can, so it's a lot about the team level. And, you know, my dad, when he was alive, he used to say to me, when I started getting into the workspace, he said, well, whatever you do, make it work at the team level. Teams are the engine of change. They're the engines of organizations, you know, whether that's, you know, he used to be in manufacturing. He introduced quality circles around the machinery in the 70s or 80s from Japan. You know, they got them talking about what's going on with their machine, because he said, I don't know what their machine is. They know it absolutely intimately. They're the ones who will know if there's a problem, or if there's a problem coming, or they just hear a little noise changing, or they've got an idea about how to improve efficiency. So what you want to do is to empower them to do it. So we're built very much around in supporting team leaders. What often happens with measurement tools is they undermine team leaders. They basically, you know, an engagement survey will go, you know, well, this team's got low engagement. It must be Steve's fault, because he must be. What we try and do is, let's say it's Steve. I've started there now. I don't know who Steve is, and it's like,
come on, Steve.
let's support Steve to have better conversations with his team, because bless Steve, he might have been promoted for his technical skills or his length of service, not his people skills. So he might not be the best people leader. So let's help him be better. And so what we do is try and present to him. So what we do with that data that I was saying we collect about how happy you were this week, but also what's a success, what's a thank you, is we package it up a bit like something like HelloFresh or Gusto sends you a box to cook from. We send him a box to run a team meeting from, and then the box is, you know, what's gone well last week, who wants to be thanked, who's been thanked, anyone got any frustrations we need to fix, things like that. So basically help make a better, more productive start the week meeting, which you've got the right data for to deal with any team issues you had before, or to shout out people who are doing a good job. And that's the way you keep morale. It's very, very team-based. I mean, yes, of course, sometimes things go through a whole organization. You know, I just think, you know, people in John Lewis probably haven't woken up, you know, today great with the news that there's 1,000 job losses, though there must be 70, 80,000, but still there's a lot of job losses. And, you know, other organizations are going to be having the same problem as we start coming out of furloughs and everything. But, you know, that's not good. But much more is, do you get on with your colleague you're working with? Are they great? Are they a jerk? You know, how's your boss? Do they give you good supportive feedback? that helps you learn, or do they just either say gloss over and go, oh, it's lovely, or go very, very negative? Neither of those are very good. So it's about creating those habits at a team level, and that's really, I think, where the magic happens. If there's magic here, it's about alignment. It's about aligning our own strengths, our own skills with the tasks we do. We get on with the people we work with. We're working towards goals that we all want to work with. That's when the magic happens, when there's alignment. And I think that's what any productivity tool must do. That's what any happiness tool must do that we do. You're looking to get that alignment.
Nice. You mentioned the P word there, and actually that leads me really nicely on. I was going to ask you whether obviously the work you've done for many years is focused on happiness, and has that given you some ways of thinking about the sort of intersection between happiness and productivity? Like, what do you see as the relationship between being happy and being productive?
So I can give you a statistical answer for that.
Yes, please.
So we ask our happiness questions on a scale of 1 to 5. Very unhappy, unhappy, okay, happy. If a team moves up half a point, it's on average 8% extra productivity. Now, how do you measure productivity? It's sometimes actually particularly the team level, but if you're doing something, it impacts both the quantity and quality of work that people do. So people, when we get in the zone, flow, people would call it.
Flow, yeah.
And we get in there and it just quickly. That's, both about speed and quality of the work we're doing. So if people are doing a very defined role, whether that's manufacturing, whether that's in a call center, whether that's whatever, there is some impact absolutely from happiness on the speed with which they do work, but they don't necessarily have the option to do the creative bits of it. Though call centers, there's all this stuff about tone of voice, opening up, better conversations with the client the customer on the other end. Sales calls, a brilliant piece of work by Emmanuel Denis from Oxford University on BT call centers, and how actually this goes right back to the weather. When the sun shone, people were happier, they sold more. Even working out people closer to a window, or they sold more when the weather was good. And that's to do with having a relaxed tone of voice, being open and hearing the customer more, because they had no prospecting in that work. They're just having a call following through to them. Can you sell them something or not? So we see it in those ways. And then there's the whole innovation and creativity bit. And there the impact's even bigger, which is that when we've got that baseline of psychological safety in a team, we've got teams that trust each other, that they, just as you were saying about, fixing. What did you say about you ask your team every Monday? You say they.
One of the questions is just, where are you stuck?
Yeah. So you're open to the fact that work is hard sometimes, that things can go wrong. Yeah. And if you're allowed to, if you're not, you're not planning to fail, but if failures are allowed, as in you've tried and it hasn't worked and we do something, then, those are good things. And the innovation one is massive. They do experiments. It's one I always quote just because it's easy to understand, but it's called the Dunker Candle experiment. And psychologists, they set people this task, and what they do is they give them some candle, a box of matches, and candles and a box of matches, something else. I forget what it is now. Anyway, you have to attach the candle to the wall and light it. Some matches and it's tacks, and you have to attach. Sorry, brain freeze. Senior moment. You have to attach the candle to the wall and light it in such a way the wax doesn't drop. It's a lateral thinking thing, and you have to basically notice there's a box of tacks, and you empty the tacks and put them on the wall. It's very easy when you know, but it's not easy when you see it. And so they give this test to people, and if people are in a neutral mood, 13% of people solve it in 5 minutes. If they put into a negative mood, 20% of people join it. That's weird. Well, when you're in a negative mood, you've got energy, so you're basically more energized in trying to do it. So if you're angry or something, you might actually solve it better than if you're totally flat. But people in a positive mood, 70%, something like that, 75% solve it. So right. 3-4 times more. And when we take that to innovation and coming up with ideas, how you just in a meeting and ideas are buzzing around, you've got that safety and you do it. And then, 1 in 20 ideas is suddenly something that could be really helpful. And so you need that. So if you're teams that are very creative and innovative, the effect is even bigger on productivity.
And I think also, the other thing is that the other way around is also true, right? So if you're having a period of productivity, then I'm sure the morale goes up. But, you know, that focus on happiness will also lead to productivity. And I think that's the sort of key focus for managers and leaders, right, is to really think about providing the happiness and the psychological safety, and then everything good comes from that.
So it absolutely does go both ways. So if you measured financial success of a team and happiness at time one and the same at time two, 6 months later, you do get a correlation coefficient from sort of success side, things going well, and happiness. But you get one the other way from happiness to success, but it's twice as strong. So basically what that means is it's a virtuous cycle, but the happiness to productivity is stronger than productivity to happiness.
Interesting.
Yeah.
That's so cool.
Incredible, actually.
Having that as the focus of your work for so long,
yeah.
What does that mean for your happiness?
I'm demanding. In a way, I prioritize. I do prioritize my. I think people don't necessarily prioritize their own happiness enough, and people go, "Oh, that's selfish." Well, it's not selfish. Happiness is actually very social, very, very between us. It's very. There's a whole giving part of happiness, all sorts of things. So, and I talked earlier on about and some consulting and getting married. Well, I'm a divorced man now, so I'm remarried, but it's like, I've had my own things in there. And, one of the reasons that marriage broke down was that I really recognized, although my marriage was really meaningful to me, my kids are really meaningful to me, I was not happy. And I had to make that very difficult decision because I was going to have to make it on my own, because my ex was quite stuck and didn't really want to move with me. And it's like I had to make a decision to leave a marriage. And that's a very hard thing to do. But that is about, and 10 years later, very good decision, in the sense that, my kids are good. My ex is still in her issues. And I'm a lot happier. So it's definitely a net gain for me. Definitely a net gain for me. And I don't think it was a net loss for the kids. They learned things about honesty, authenticity, and saw us as different human beings. I think sometimes kids see the two parents as one thing, one team, and they saw us differently. And I think it wasn't a bad experience, but I did have them every other week. We did co-parent well together. So there were things like that, but that is a decision where I have to prioritize. And then with my work, when I left NEF, I realized I got stuck, and I'd been there for 10 years. And I remember talking with I'd left my marriage, but I was going out with another woman, and I said to her, very loyal to NEF. And she said, no, you've got to be loyal to the idea. You've got a great idea about happiness at work. That's what you should be loyal to, not the organization that you're with. They'll be fine. You've got this idea, be loyal to that idea. And, she actually helped me, move myself out of the think tank world into the business world.
It strikes me that those experiences are experiences where you're really being quite good at being honest with yourself and like really appraising your own situation and wrestling with stuff that a lot of people would just leave that, like just sweep it under the carpet or just bury it or forget about it or whatever. Is there anything that you learned just about how to ask yourself the hard questions through that?
I think I said earlier, I trained as a therapist when I was young. So the therapeutic model is interesting to me. And of course, I return to that occasionally. So I obviously did at that stage. So, a lot of questioning about what I'm doing, why I'm doing it, I think is helpful. And then there's some things which just sort of naturally heal, don't they? That some of it is about time, and I made some poor choices with dating afterwards, and then after a while you start to think, well, I like that about that person, and I need this for me. I need this amount of space for me, and I need to walk. If I don't walk in life, I get a bit grumpy, and so I need someone that's sort of going to be confident I'm going to walk and come back. I mean, that walk is trivial, but you know what I mean? It's like, if you're, I'm very happily married to Zoe now. And, one of the things was, I'm a speaker. I go and travel sometimes, but, she knows that's what I do. And it's like, it's not, it's finding out what's right for you, isn't it? So I think it is about questioning and also being always open, because happiness is not a destination, it's a journey. It's always changing, and bad things are going to happen to us in the future, to both you and me, to every listener here. We're going to die in the end, we're going to have some suffering, things are going to happen, life is not all bunches of roses, and how do we deal with that, and how do we cope with that, and how do we make the best of this extraordinary life that we've been offered? It's here, we're here, let's enjoy it.
Absolutely, totally hear you on that. And I'm about halfway through that thing of the dating myself, so maybe when we stop the record, we can compare.
Painful process though. But the prize is good.
The prize is good. I'm looking forward to it. One last question I wanted to ask you about. So you had an endorsement from Tony Hsieh, ex CEO of Zappos, who sadly died recently, and I just, as someone who'd obviously written this book, Delivering Happiness, and he was a big inspiration to me. I just wondered if you had any reflections on his life and the work of Tony Hsieh.
Tony Hsieh, yes, I first met him about 2011, I think, and I worked with that. He set up a group called Delivering Happiness. I worked for them for several years. I wouldn't say I knew Tony. I met him a dozen times or something, and I definitely got drunk with him. And he was always a bit of a lost soul. There was something about him that was quite distant, but I knew him when he was already fantastically successful. And he's sort of surrounded himself with a lot of people. He was quite a genius. I mean, he was both strategically and culturally a genius. I mean, clearly, very, very bold move to set up an online shoe company. As he used to say, it's like the poster child of a disastrous internet idea, and he made it into $1 billion business. Yeah. And he did that through culture. He had some really, really wise things about the culture. What's so interesting is he couldn't apply that wisdom to himself. I know people that knew him very well, and they would still say they didn't know him. And he was also unreachable in the last time of his life. He'd got a lot of money, and he got very into some certain types of narcotics, and that's what killed him, really. Not literally, but he got caught in the fire, but he was presumably high and whatever. But bless him, he was an interesting man. He was very, he was someone that liked organizing things and seeing how they were, and he was very, very ambitious, very, very visionary, and in lots of ways, he was. I don't know. I still feel sad about him when we talk about him, because it was this huge shock when I heard he died, and obviously I wrote to people, but it's such a loss, because I'd like to see what he did. I'd like him to have had his dark period and then come out of it, because I think those people who do that redemption, I think he needed to go through some darkness, but if he could have come out, he'd have done other brilliant things. He'd already left Zappos.
Absolutely. He sort of really struck you as someone who had lots of businesses in him at, different, maybe even not businesses, but that whole regeneration thing he was doing in Las Vegas and stuff didn't
go perfectly, but the idea was brilliant. He was a great, and the book is worth reading because it's a very heartfelt book on building business, and quite honest. Could have done with a slight edit, in my opinion, not for length, but for continuity. There were some bits of it that jumped a bit, but it was he was inspirational. Yeah.
Well, I feel like we've just covered so much stuff in this 54 minutes, and so just want to say thank you for being on the show. It's been great to have you. Do you want to just share how people can get hold of you and find out more about Friday Pulse, and where can people go?
Yeah, so we've released something called Friday1.com, which is a personal happiness at work checkup. And so if you want to go and think about your own happiness at work, it's a statistical thing that helps you reflect. A bit like there's personality tests, but about happiness at work. So that's something to go and do. You find me on LinkedIn. So Nic is spelled with that K, it's Nic Marks, and you find me. And I post every 2 weeks a blog article basically on happiness at work mainly. Fridaypulse.com if you're interested in our tool for your organization, your team. We have a startup product for small and a larger one for businesses. And but the main thing is just to take your own happiness seriously. I think that's the tip.
Absolutely. And that feels like a really good way to finish. So Nic, thank you so much for being on Beyond Busy.
Thank you so much, man.
This video is sponsored by Think Productive, home of the Productivity Ninja. We help people and organizations to increase their impact and make space for what matters through a range of workshops, programs, and coaching. Head to thinkproductive.com to find out more. Are you interested in booking me as a speaker for your event? You want to sign up for my Rev Up for the Week email? Do you want to buy some of my books? Or do you just want to find out what I'm doing right now? It's all at grahamalcott.com/links. And if you like this video, please like, subscribe and share so we can make more. Thanks for watching.